Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison.
My name's Brandon Bonner.
And we'll be your host. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. We are about this episode and next episode, we've been dealing with a series of family-type discussions, and so we're winding down to the end of that. Today's discussion is we're going to be talking about the collapse of the family, talking about some of the causes. We're going to get to some of the solutions. There's four main areas that research has indicated are indicative of collapse. The first one of these is the divorce rate within families, and we're not talking just within Christian families. Across the board, divorce rate is just out of control. The second issue is absent dad, fatherless families, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. The third one is the breakdown of parental authority and discipleship. This is specifically geared to Christian families, and then disappearance of multi-generational unity. And so we've got a lot of material to cover. I decided, Brandon, that we were going to do these just kind of in prompts here. So I'm going to read a little bit of text here, and then we're going to break this down a little bit and talk about it. So let's talk about divorce. It's no longer seen as a last resort. Used to be seen that way. So the cultural reality is this, that it has shifted from the tragedy of the last option to really a normalized solution. It's kind of your go-to thing if things aren't working out. There's no incentive there to really try to work things out. It's like, oh, well, okay, let's get divorced. So commitment is viewed as conditional as long as I'm happy. Conflict resolution has been replaced with exit strategies. So when covenant becomes convenience, then families obviously become more fragile. So I want to talk a little bit about what's driving this shift. And this is not anything new. The divorce rates, we're going to go back 50 years, and we begin to see a trend of divorce rates increasing. So there's this first thing I want to talk about, low tolerance for hardship. Let's unpack that a little bit. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people don't know how to handle difficult times. And this bleeds not only into the context of the marriage, but just relationships in general.
Yeah.
You have a disagreement. We see that a lot, like political disagreements or, feelings hurt, whatever it might be. Just in the relationship, I don't need this friend. I don't need this person in my life anymore. Or I don't need to be married to this person anymore. And Craig, I mean, life's difficult at times. And so there's going to be a lot of hardship, and people are just willing to pull out of it.
We discussed last week about society creating a system where just we're set up for like comfort. Mm-hmm. And I think probably the reason why there was a lower divorce rate in the past was because life was really hard. Like people didn't have the conveniences. Just living was hard work. And now, I mean, yes, we work hard for a living. Like people go to jobs and stuff, but we've got a lot of creature comforts that make life easy. Mm-hmm. So I think that plays a part into it as well. That the younger generations being in society today have had all of these things. They don't know anything different. Is that you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that another issue culturally, at least maybe my generation, I don't know if it bleeds into other generations, but when things are difficult, we like to just remove ourselves from it. Like, oh, I don't like that uncomfort, or I don't like that hard experience, or whatever it might be. So I'm just going to remove myself from that experience so I don't have to grow through that.
Yeah.
So we don't understand, like, hey, in order to grow and get better and make a better marriage or a better friendship or whatever the relationship is, or to find success in what I'm doing in X, Y, and Z, there requires a level of hardship and discomfort and work. The result of that is growth, and it's a win. But we just pull out of that. Oh, that's hard. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. I'm going to avert to do something different.
Yeah. Another driving factor I wanted to get to specifically, we've got a list here. We're not going to be able to talk about all of them. Unrealistic expectations of marriage. Yeah, that's a big one. And I talk about that I do premarital counseling. And it's amazing to me how many young couples that are coming in to get married have this idea of what marriage is. And it's so completely unrealistic. And so I think, when we, as the older generations, as married couples, we're not teaching our children about, marriage is hard. You've got two different people with two different personalities with a set of opinions, and they come together, and you have to make all of that mix together and be like this cohesive unit. I remember as a campus minister, a particular young lady who could not stay in a relationship because her mom and dad never had a disagreement. And she told me that. She says, my mom and dad have never disagreed about anything. So her expectation of a relationship was that there was never going to be any disagreement or argument. And I told her, I said, they do disagree. They just have never done it in front of you. Mm-hmm. And she lost her mind. Like, she's like, how dare you? She thought it was an indictment on it. So that's the thing as parents that I talk about when I do premarital counseling is parents should not be afraid to have disagreements in front of their children. Now, there should be boundaries there and things, topics that you don't discuss in front of your kids. But children can benefit by seeing a mom and a dad disagree and then have good, godly conflict resolution.
Yep.
That's a realistic expectation.
Yep. No, absolutely. And we talked about that a lot in marriage counseling. And I think that's been good to see. I've seen you and your wife have plenty of disagreements.
Yes, we have.
But it's good to see like healthy resolve and resolution from that. And I think media plays a role into this. Yeah. This idea of like, these rom-coms or romance movies of these relationships are just like magical and perfect. And
right.
And there are instances, I think, in the marriage that are like that, but there's also difficult times and disagreements. And so we're seeing like a very one-sided view of a relationship. Or maybe we're seeing it in other people that we're looking at, parents, friends, coworkers, like, oh man, this, Bob and Sally's marriage, they're so happy. They never have any hardship or disagreements because we put up a front, post pictures, we're traveling around, but the reality is there's difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you see this list. Is there one that jumps out there to you? We talked about those first two.
I think the you deserve better instead of working through it, being kind of a cultural message is pretty interesting. That when you have difficult times in anything in a marriage context, you typically would maybe talk through it with a friend. So I have a good group of guys that, and I know Lexi's going to see this and I don't, gotta be careful. You like go talk through these things and good, healthy friends will push back and say, no, Brandon, I think you need to rethink this or, so I think putting people in your life around you that are going to support you and support your marriage versus them being like, oh yeah, Brandon, you deserve better. You don't need to put up with that. And you can go find someone else. Yeah. I think the people you surround yourself with, and also being aware of advice that you're taking, like who you're taking it from. If you're taking it from someone that's been through 10 divorces, maybe not the best person to get advice from. I don't know. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing here, and I going out on a limb, I'm going to say our culture, our society is pro. This sounds strong. I don't want to say pro-divorce. It's just they're not. It's not about sticking through things. It's a disposable society we live in. Mm-hmm. If something gets worn out, just go buy something new, and that unfortunately bleeds over into the marriage covenant, where society says, "What you're tired of that person? They don't satisfy you anymore. They smell bad in the mornings. You can upgrade." You can update to the newer version.
Yep.
And so that's such a pervasive thing in our society today, and I think that has carried over into the marriage commitment.
Yep. Yep.
So,
what about, and that kind of leads to the next point. I love your thoughts on prioritizing personal fulfillment over perseverance.
Yeah, I mean that feeds right into it. It's we talked a little bit before the podcast about the biblical idea of marriage allows man and a woman to elevate their status, both of them to become more Christ-like. That you're not going to get that opportunity in any other relationship. And somebody says, "What do you mean by that, Craig?" Well, what I mean by that is that when you go back to the Genesis account and you find the created order of things and how men were created in a way, our base nature is to kind of be selfish. And any woman will tell you, yep, that's absolutely right. And women, if you look at Scripture there, they were created as the Ezer Kenegdu, the Hebrew there that's used for them, equal but opposite. So they're really enjoying a status that is, very much on the same level as men. And God goes so far as to even say that the desire for woman will be for her husband, which means that she naturally inclined to tell him what he needs to do, to rule over him. So it's very interesting then when you see sin enter the picture that God's redemption works through marriage in that he allows men to elevate their selfish, self-serving, base nature, and we're called to love our wives as Christ loved the church, which is sacrificially. He doesn't ask women to give up their life for their husband. He asks us as men that's the level of love. It's sacrificial. And then he also tells women that they will have to be in submission to their husband. So it's very interesting. Those are the two key components that we see Jesus Christ modeling. He gives himself up for the church by willingly sacrificing his life. And he does that through the submission to his Father. So he demonstrates both this idea of complete submissiveness and sacrificial love. Mm-hmm. And so that's a unique characteristic that we as husbands and wives are able to elevate ourselves by imitating Christ in those aspects.
Yeah. And then, tying this in, maybe transitioning to how do we restore this, but how do we prepare, or are we preparing people for weddings more than marriages? I think about, as a parent, you as a parent have probably had conversations with your kids about these types of things and what marriages look like, and really the spiritual implications, the scriptural, context around the marriage is extremely powerful. In discussions we had when Lexi and I were dating in college, and there was moments I remember in our study, I was like, "Whoa, this is tough to think through conceptually." And,
yeah.
So
we think about this in terms of a wedding is 5 hours,
mm-hmm.
marriage is 50 years. So we need to be prepping our kids for the 50 years, not the 5 hours.
Yep.
And a lot of times we put more focus on that. So restoration solutions, we talk about, Craig, what's the solution to all of this stuff? And some of it is pretty obvious. One is to rebuild a covenant mindset. Second, teach conflict resolution, forgiveness, and endurance. All of these things, by the way, need to be being modeled at home by the parents, centering marriages on Christ, not our feelings. He should be our go-to for how to live that out. And normalizing staying and working, not leaving and starting over. So that disposable society that we have. Thoughts or additions to those things?
No, I mean, I think those are all good. The one that sticks out to me a lot is conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before at Central, and you and I have talked about it. We have such a nature to avoid conflict, and this is, I think, a method of avoiding conflict. This is something I don't enjoy, so you know what? I'm just going to pull out from it and not have to deal with this. So really understanding how do we properly resolve conflict through a biblical and scriptural lens. How did Jesus handle conflict, and what does he have to say about conflict, and what does true forgiveness look like? Those are things that we need, not just in the context of marriage, but in the context of the church.
Absolutely.
In the context of friendships, in the context of any relationship.
Yeah.
There's a proper way to do conflict
resolution. And bottom line, it's hard work. Yep. That's why people avoid it. They sweep it under the rug, but that never, ever works. It's always going to come back. It's always going to resurface. And so I think it's time well spent for churches, church leadership, to invest in conflict resolution classes, get people who teach that understand it, from a biblical concept, because it's wide reaching. It impacts not just marriages but life in general for all conflict. Let's talk about this second one, the fatherless family. This is very disturbing to me, and I want to just go ahead and set this up with some research that's been done. This is says in TV and streaming, research shows that male characters, especially fathers and caregivers, are framed in negative or diminished ways. The Gina Davis Institute analysis of 225 popular scripted broadcast and streaming shows from 2013 to 2020, so this is pretty recent, found that male caregivers were nearly twice as likely as female caregivers to be shown as incompetent, 1.5 times more likely to be emotionally abusive, 4 times more likely to be physically abusive. The report explicitly says men are often depicted as abusive, incompetent, and or emotionally distant or stunted. And we see this. We see this in the sitcoms. We see this. You and I, we're talking about like Tool Time, an older sitcom, the bumbling buffoon. Men who are portrayed as just stupid. They don't know what they're doing. And they have to be rescued over and over again. And so this is the picture that culture is putting out there as far as men are concerned. So the cultural reality is this. We're seeing a dramatic rise in homes without fathers, either physically absent or emotionally disengaged. And at the same time, culture, to those statistics, is undermining fatherhood. So what do we see as far as real-world impact is concerned with fathers who are portrayed this way and really pushed into this mold, this pattern? We're going to talk a little bit about toxic masculinity and that kind of stuff. But we see, research bears this out, that in homes without fathers, there is a massive increase in behavioral issues with children. And so what do we do with that? That's one of those things we don't want to talk about, because it indicates that, okay, maybe men do have an important role to play in families. And society is saying, men are not contributing in positive ways to society.
Yep.
Or to families.
Yeah, and I think it's weird. There's like this, and I think it's getting better. I think there's some like cultural recognition and some pushback from my generation, or seems to be. But there's this weird like competition between man and woman.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't need a man, or oh, I don't need a woman, and I'm gonna like pull myself. Like I can be so independent and don't have to engage with people from the opposite sex, and I don't need them to have fulfillment, and so I think that definitely plays a role into this, because ultimately what I think is happening, and it kind of ties into our first point about divorce, like you have folks outside of the marriage having kids, and the father leaving because they can leave a lot more conveniently than a woman's able to, because a woman has to carry the child to a full birth. I mean, so there's a lot of, I think, issues there. And I think what I think about is, what kind of men are we elevating in our country? And they're not positive ones.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, not to,
like role models.
Yeah, like not to step on toes or get political, but I mean, think about like our president, or our congressional appointees, or movie stars and or NFL players and MLB players and all these athletes. Like, we're putting them on these elevated platforms, but then you read articles all the time about how poorly they've treated their wives or kids, or beating their girlfriends, or just had so many marriages with so many different kids and is disconnected. I mean, so it's like, these are the type of men that we're putting up on a pedestal in this country, and then we're surprised at the result of people following their example.
Yeah, I always appreciated, Charles Barkley was an older NBA player. He played for the 76ers, I think. But he always said, he's like, don't view me as a role model. I mean, he was at least honest about it. And I always appreciated that, because he really, as a lot of people did look up to him, and he's like, no, don't look up to me. I'm good at playing basketball. That's what I do. That doesn't mean that I am the person that you need to model your life after. And so I think about this too in terms of, well, the studies, the statistics that are out there, homes that don't have fathers in them. I mentioned, there's an increase in behavioral issues with children. There's also a higher risk of poverty and incarceration. We see this in the inner cities in black families, and thank goodness, there are good, solid men of color who have stepped forward and recognized the issue that there's a lot of women, single women who are raising children, multiple children. There's no father in the picture, and it's just devastating to the community. And so, you look at crime rates and statistics, and again, this is sensitive narrative because some people don't want to go here, but studies are showing it, just conclusive evidence that homes without dads in them have more problems than homes with dads in them. Identity confusion, especially in young men, we see if you go back and you look at all of these school shootings, you're going to find a correlation, a connection with these kids and having either no dad in the home or an emotionally distant, absent dad who's not connected with his kids at all. So looking at all of this from a biblical lens perspective, God says in Ephesians chapter 6 that fathers are called to lead and nurture spiritually. And so that this idea of nurturing we've put on women, but men have a part to play in this. And so you mentioned about this whole idea of toxic masculinity. Mm-hmm. What does good godly masculinity look like in society today?
I think good masculinity, biblical masculinity, is someone that's strong. I think that's an aspect, and I think that I think that's probably where toxic masculinity gets its bad rap. Like, you got to be tough and emotionally closed off and compartmentalize everything, and you'll be fine. But from a biblical standpoint, I think there's an aspect of being strong, grounded maybe is a better term. But I think the big thing that's missing is sacrificial love. Yeah. In terms of a masculine figure having sacrificial love.
And I think part of that too, a dad has to be present in his children's life, and his wife, that being there in the moment and not being closed off. Again, that selfish nature that men kind of gravitate towards anyway. God's calling us to not be that, to be involved in the lives of our family, and to be that spiritual leader. And it's interesting how society and culture has really pushed men to become, talk about just what it means to be a manly man. That's not a bad thing. And society has pushed so hard against that, where now you have so many girly men out there. Like, it's cool now to be effeminate. And women, for the most part, kind of jumped on that bandwagon. That's what they thought that they wanted, because what they're really searching for is a present man in their life that models good godly masculinity. But what's happened is that there's been a demasculization of men altogether, and that's against our nature too. And so it creates this conflict. And you can look at a lot of different social media feeds today and listen to where women are at now. They're like, what's happened to all the manly men? Mm-hmm. Like they need that. They want that because that's how God created us. Yep. And when we venture outside of that paradigm, we're asking for issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we escape responsibility a lot. I think that some men can have very difficult journeys and, working a lot and providing. And so you kind of justify, well, I don't need to be present at home because I'm providing for the family. And so when they get home, they just kind of shut down. And that's not a good example, nor a biblical example of what a father looks like.
Right.
And I think it's important for us, I hope that I'm this way as a father one day, but, to model the best I can the relationship that God modeled for us of that, father figure. And because that's the first experience as a child. that's the first preview into a little bit of what our relationship should look like with God. He views us as his children, and he's
Right.
our father.
Right.
If you don't have that or not modeling that well, then your kids don't really understand that dynamic.
Yeah. This feeds into the third breakdown of the family, which is there's a breakdown of parental authority and discipleship. And I mean, it's kind of obvious. I mean, if men have been pushed into this corner, they're no longer absent they're no longer present in the home. The masculinity piece of it has been pushed away. So all of the stuff that culture is doing, then it makes sense that there's going to be a lack of parental authority. So culture's looking at families, at moms and dads, to be shifting from leading their family to be like negotiators or friends with their children. And so when that happens, the spiritual formation of your child is, well, here's the best way I've heard it put. Your children have plenty of friends at school. They don't need more friends in the home. They need parents. That's what this boils down to. Parents who are willing to put in the hard work, to sometimes, a lot of times, have battles with your kids and draw the line and say, no, that's, yes, I understand that's what's going on at your school. I understand that that's what everybody's doing, but you're not going to do that because I'm your parent and I'm drawing these boundaries for you. And it's amazing the research that's out there that shows that kids thrive when they have parameters versus the kids that are being raised by very permissive parents, their friends. It's like, yeah, my mom and dad let me do anything. Those kids are the ones that have behavioral issues.
Yep. No, I mean, I completely agree, and I think it is enlightening to think about, as a parent, a responsibility is to be a disciple maker.
Yeah.
For your children. I've never, and I've heard that a couple years ago, but I've never thought of that parent-child relationship looking like that. Like I think it was maybe in your book, it was the first time I heard it, but like that relationship should look like you're making a disciple. Like what we're called to do, we all know, the Great Commission, Matthew 28, but like we're called to do that with our kids. They need to know who Christ is, and they need to be disciples of him.
Yep. And your children you should be their first discipler. They should see that first from mom and dad before anybody else. And so that requires, making hard decisions. That requires discipline. Scripture says, God disciplines those that he loves. And so, parents that are so afraid of disciplining their children are going to have kids who are just going to run all over them when they get older, and that's going to create chaos in the home. So reestablishing the home as the center of spiritual formation is vitally important. Modeling faith consistently, not just verbally, but they need to see it in your actions. Set loving, firm boundaries, talked about that, and prioritizing intentional discipleship on a daily basis. They need to see that every day. Okay, we're going to close out then with this last one. The disappearance of multi-generational unity is another thing that is breaking families apart. Generations that are isolated, that are disconnected, and often having tension with one another. So when generations separate, wisdom is lost and identity weakens. So here's the question: why are generations competing with one another instead of connecting?
I think that generational bias has increased a lot over the past, I don't know how long, but it seems to be increasing. Like, oh, okay, you're a boomer, or you're a Gen X, or a millennial, or Gen Z. Like, there's this like divide in creating a lot of generational bias.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of it. I think another piece of it is we have not done a good job of rooting in Christendom what's actually important, and that's Christ. Why do generations separate? Why would families fracture? Well, it's probably because of some core belief differences. I think a lot of it probably is political in nature. At least that's what I see the most of. Mm-hmm. And so we have failed somewhere along the way to send the message of like, hey, we can disagree politically, but that does not change the fact that we're family. and the core of our relationship should not be impacted by political beliefs.
Yeah, and we've really made, and just for the sake of argument, let's say that
Uh-oh.
political. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I accidentally touched this cord. Seems to be we've made politics. Politics have always been divisive. What's different today is that technology has elevated politics in a way that has never happened before. And so everybody gets a voice, everybody has a platform, everybody feels like they need to express their opinion on stuff. And honestly, the vast majority of the stuff that's coming across our social media feeds is not even true. It's so far left leaning or so far right leaning. And the truth of the matter is that most of us still align within the major elements, but we're constantly being fed these algorithms that are putting stuff in front of there that's extreme, and that has created this huge divide where the younger generations literally have no respect for the older generations, and the older generations think that the younger generations are just absolutely incapable of any intelligent cognitive thought. Why? Because they too are seeing the things of kids eating Tide Pods and, just like the stupidity that's out there that gets promoted. Okay, but that's not the majority of people. It really isn't. Like there's a lot of kids your age and younger, the upcoming generations, that are so incredibly brilliant and smart. And despite what everybody thinks, a lot of my generation and the baby boomers and the greatest generation, my parents' generation, they've got so much wisdom that it would baffle your mind. So there's things that each generation have to offer, and unfortunately, because of, I think, technology, I'm going to pin it on technology, has created this huge rift, this huge divide.
I will add something. I think there's another component that may be impacting this, and I think it's the ability to listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't feel like we do a good job at listening on either side. So older generation maybe wants to instill solutions or wisdom rather than listening to a younger generation's issues or problems. And the younger generation's not wanting to listen to the older generation because, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not relevant. So I think the ability to listen, some of the best disciplers or role models or mentors I've had in my life have always been very effective listeners. They provide solutions. Sometimes they're good solutions. Sometimes they're not good solutions, but they do provide solutions, but there's a place for that, right? I know they're going to listen to me, so I feel comfortable engaging with them and talking with them about whatever's going on so they can impart wisdom.
And I think the takeaway here, no generation has all the correct answers. And with the listening aspect of it, I think we need to understand that listening takes work. And it's new, the issues are a lot of times nuanced, and that takes time. And here again, I'm going to keep coming back to this because I just see so much evidence of it. We're conditioned now to not want to take time. We live in a 15-second snippet, and if it takes more than 15 seconds, I've lost you. And so that's a problem. We need to relearn how to listen, but we also need to relearn how to be patient and expand our attention time to more than 10, 15-second TikTok clips.
Yep.
So, good discussion.
Yep.
Good discussion. We're out of time on this podcast, but. For this episode, but join us next week as we jump into another issue on the family. I think that's going to be our last one. If you've liked this podcast, feel free to share it, like it. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Central Church of Christ, for always allowing us to do this. I think it's got some good relevancy here. Also, our other sponsor.
Ministry League.
I was wanting to say ministry. I couldn't figure. Ministry League is great. You can see the QR code there on your if you're watching on our YouTube. Anyway, thanks, Brandon, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
As you do every week.
Yeah. I don't have a choice.
Until our next episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War. Be kind to one another, love one another. Remember, the Creator of the universe loves you so much, He gave up His only Son for you. Have a blessed day.